Tonight on Dynasty Points, we talk about the collapse of the Baltimore Ravens, the fallout from the Detroit Lions, how it affects Dynasty fantasy football. We have Fantasy Points Discord, AMA questions, and so much more. Remember that we have fun here, and you should too. Let's dive right in.
What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
Yes, that's right. We are talking about, well, the Baltimore Ravens and what happened on Sunday, how I survived, how we got through. Before we do that, we're going to talk about dynasty discounts. Should we get discounts based on playoff performances? Obviously, fantasy football really stops in week 17, except for psychopaths that have week 18 finals or 2-week finals. You guys need help. I feel like you need to feel something emotionally and you're missing something in life. Get a cat. Maybe that'll help get those week 17 championships. I don't know. Joining today, we got Ryan Heath. We got Andy Buckler debuting on the main program. Give him a welcome, everyone. Let him know he is appreciated. Obviously, my co-host from the Dynasty Points Market Report podcast that has been so well received. We thank all you guys. Shout out to everyone watching, listening, wherever you are. Hit that sub button. Much love. Wesley, I see your question. You got here at 6:30 Central Time. Got here over an hour early. Shout out to you. Bindles wants to know our thoughts on Chicago. That's going to come up today. Joe, I see your question. I'm going to answer that one for you. Jamie, if you calling me a genius, I hate to tell you, I don't read. All that being said, let's dive right into it. Dynasty discounts. This might sound crazy, but I have a theory for this, Ryan. The question I want to ask is, do you get a discount off of bad playoff games, bad playoff performances? And every year, there are a few. And I have had this theory that the last thing people see of a player on the football field and how it reacts to their DFS now or best ball or fantasy sticks in their mind longer than the whole body of work. You want to remember a player fondly. But what happens if you remember a player for something so ass, like, I don't know, a wide receiver throwing an interception to end a game, or a fumble by a quarterback like Baker Mayfield to seemingly end their run and have their coach leave and be a head coach? Lots of things can affect a player's value or perception of value, if you would, from the playoffs. Do you think that there's something to the dynasty playoff fallout?
It's a tough question because while I completely agree with you in terms of the last thing you saw from a player is going to have an outsized impact on their value, and probably more than it should, I do think that fantasy managers are in a bit of a different headspace during the playoffs. So in the NFL playoffs, I feel like all we care about and all we're arguing about is like the quarterback narratives, frankly. Maybe that's just me spending too much time on Twitter, but I do think people's perception of quarterbacks materially changes during the playoffs. Honestly, probably the biggest example from this year is actually in a positive direction. I think people's perception of Jaden Daniels has gone up a lot over these past couple of weeks. Now, he was already the consensus Dynasty 103. Will we see people valuing him over a Josh Allen, over a Lamar Jackson if he continues this run? I wouldn't personally, but I don't think it's out of the question. So that's something I have in mind. But I do think that for non-quarterbacks, yes, it doesn't look great to watch Mark Andrews just lose the game at the end and drop that touchdown. But I also don't think that unless your league is so active that you are actively trading players back and forth right now in probably the most dead period on average for every league or for every dynasty league, I don't think it ultimately is going to stick that much. I think what sticks with you more is what the player actually did for you in the fantasy season. I think when you're in your brain as a fantasy manager, that is more what's sticking with you than literally the last thing you saw them do on TV. But if there are Mark Andrews discounts or Jameson Williams discount, maybe not Jameson Williams, but Mark Andrews discounts, sure, take advantage of it. I just have a bit of doubt in terms of how real that is.
I think that's a fair point. I will say in the startup started when the playoffs started, I believe it was, or maybe it was week 18. I got Jaden Daniels at 103. I can tell you, I doubt I'm getting him at anything less than 101 now. So I think that you're right. For quarterbacks, it might matter a lot. Buck, do you think there's anything do you think it matters more if they're younger versus older? Because guys like Jaden Daniels going from like the 103, maybe up to the 101, or rookie players, or McMillan, because he had a decent playoff run, etc., get to maybe move up a little bit more. But the veterans, people just probably have their thoughts about them.
Yeah, I think the young players definitely move more because Jaden Daniels, everyone's watching him and everyone sees it. Like, he's literally making history. But I think certain players, it matters. Like, I definitely think there'll be an Andrews discount because that was everyone watched that. And I think there's a chance that people believe that maybe he's not on the team next year because that's already been, thrown out. So I think there'll be a legitimate discount for that if you even want to take that discount. I mean, he wasn't good this year. He'll be 30 next year, and if he's on a different team. But I do think with him and Goff, but Goff is different reasons, more of a coaching thing than a playoff. But yeah, I agree with Ryan for the most part. I don't really think it happens, but I think it's more likely that a player can go up than go down, if that makes sense, with good performances rather than bad ones.
No, I like that. I think that makes a ton of sense. Just for note, in that same startup, Mark Andrews got back to the 412. So his value skyrocketed again during the back half of the year. And now you're right, $11 million the Ravens could save if they do cut him. He's $16 million against the cap. They do need to get Likely signed and probably want to keep him. There are conversations that they could move on. I doubt they will. He probably retires a Raven. They'll probably renegotiate his contract like they did Ronnie Stanley, who they also have to bring back. But that's Ravens talk. We don't want Ravens talk here yet. But I think you're right. Younger players definitely have that chance. One of the reasons you didn't update your ranks after the game this weekend. No. Like, we don't get to see every player play. Now we're just taking bias because these players are the best players left balling out, right? We're not dropping A.J. Brown in dynasty rankings because he's not being A.J. Brown in the playoffs. I don't think you're getting a discount right now on A.J. Brown simply because he hasn't balled out or they had a snow game. I will say guys like Barkley, I don't think he's going to be able to move up. He's not going to be a first-round pick. He's already getting drafted in the second. Yeah, he's probably the MVP on the Eagles, and now people want him in the MVP of the league. Whatever your Twitter discourse might be, he's just not moving into the first round. He's great. He's just not. Christian McCaffrey last year, after he should have won the MVP over Lamar Jackson. We know that statistically. Regardless of record or whatever, my opinion, I even said it last year. He didn't go in the first round, and it's Christian McCaffrey. So he's not gaining value just because. So I don't think we should be knocking guys like Jalen Hurts. I'm not knocking Jalen Hurts' value. If anything, I would knock Jalen Hurts' value simply because he looked like ass throwing the football this year most of the year. It's been a conversation across the league. I'm not doing it because of what we've seen in the playoffs. One of them was a blizzard. I'm not dropping Stafford down because he didn't complete the last pass of the game. He looked like a god in the fourth quarter. I'm not moving Kyron down because he fumbled in the playoff game. He looked great still, and McVay loves him. So, yeah, Jamie even said, as much as I'd hate Kyron, I'm not dropping him or moving him down because he didn't score a touchdown last week. Exactly. So I think it's unfair to base your rankings off of a small pool of players. I think what it could do is maybe break some tiers for you, make some decisions a little easier maybe, but I think you're right. There might be some discounts on veterans. I don't think there's any discounts on youth. Someone in the chat, Bruce, said tried to trade Brian Robinson after his 2-touchdown performance. No interest. So it's not even like you could totally capitalize on these things either. Last thing I'm going to say on this before we move on, I think where you're going to see this reflected the most is in startups. I think the value isn't going to change. Discounts aren't going to happen except for when you are in startups. You will see variation of values.
I think just quickly, the last thing I wanted to add on this is that this kind of conversation lays bare a difference between the fantasy community and I think the NFL community at large. Us fantasy guys in Dynasty, sure, but especially if you play something like DFS or like a more weekly style game, we kind of understand that 1 week samples mean almost nothing in terms of how we should be thinking about a player moving forward, right? And it's not to say that like the broader NFL media or NFL fan base doesn't have any understanding of sample sizes, but I think it hits home for us every single week in fantasy football. So that creates an advantage for us, I guess, in terms of player evaluation. But I think more often than not, it makes it, as we've been saying, that there aren't going to be like these big market discounts, even if like the Twitter sentiment on a player is much lower than it was a week before.
Yeah, nothing you said is wrong there. I think the DFS streets have kind of leveled that playing field off at least a little bit. I think that's a totally fair assumption to make. Buck, anything to add before we move on?
No, I think that's all good. I will say one thing, like you said, like maybe Baker discount. I already forgot about the fumble. That felt like that was 2 months ago at this point. So even me, I don't even think that really exists. But I agree with most of what you guys said about that for sure.
I have a vesting interest in Baker Mayfield's career long term simply because of Lamar Jackson arguments on Twitter. So I have to obviously point out that yes, Lamar fumbled, but Baker technically fumbled their season away overall. So anyway, I'm not bitter about it. Speaking of not being bitter about it, let's talk about the Ravens choke job, because I got to tell you, they choked harder than some subsections on the hub. It was stupendous the way they fumbled that bag. It was not good. And we had subscribers checking in on me. Ryan hilariously DM'd me after, I can't remember if it was the interception or the fumble. I think it was the fumble where you just said, "I'm sorry."
I think I DM'd you multiple times throughout that game, and I think every time I was just apologizing because like I felt bad for you and what your team was doing, more because you had said basically all of these things. You had predicted pretty much every potential twist and turn of that game, like to a T. And I know that in the past, Thomas, that I have called you. I don't know if I've called you crazy, but I've suggested that you're a little bit too emotionally invested in your football team and that it clouds your judgment, that you might have a bit of a negativity bias. And I mean, I'm guilty of that too, right? So I think I see it in other people easily. So I'm like, yeah, Thomas, maybe relax, like maybe enjoy watching your team play in the playoffs this weekend and don't think that hard about it. But yeah, as soon as the game was on, I was like, oh God, like I felt terrible. I just completely gaslit you. Of course, everything you were saying was exactly going to happen. Yeah, right. That's my bad, man. This is my official apology to you, and to Ravens fans everywhere.
I appreciate that, Ryan. That means a lot. I am told that I am a little bit, Jacob, the worst offender of this, who's telling me that I'm potentially crazy for how I talk about the only thing I didn't predict was the 2-point conversion. The only thing I didn't say that someone was dropping a 2-pointer, but I said crazy, stupid fumble is going to happen. There's going to be a pick, a bad penalty, which was the penalty at the end of halftime to put them up by a lot, which sealed the game. The comeback, the fake comeback, the other, like everything that happened, I did pretty much predict how it was going to go. So that does mean a lot. However, it doesn't change the fact that this is multiple years now where it feels like a mental collapse from the team. And my question that we have received and that I have scoped through Twitter and kind of read the room is, do the Ravens need new leadership? And when I ask this question, I'll ask it like this. Do they need, for me, they've already missed the hiring cycle. Unless they make a trade, Mike Tomlin for Harbaugh straight up, I don't know what you're going to do for coaches. Harbaugh has the most wins on the road in NFL playoff history. Since the Super Bowl, they have a losing playoff record. This is just how the Ravens operate. I don't think Harbaugh's actually gone. Monken might be gone. Now I'm back to panicking about the Ravens offense, which is going to shift my opinions of wide receivers and tight ends and, well, probably not the running back. I think Derrick Henry's, anyone that shows up is just going to give Derrick Henry the ball. Let's just be honest. Like, well, except for Monken when they need it on the 2-yard line for a 2-point conversion, but I digress. Twice, mind you, twice, but I digress. So obviously this can drastically affect the Ravens players for Dynasty, but this is probably the least Dynasty related question we're going to ask. But you don't see this on great teams. Constant discipline issues. It was a problem all year, the penalties and not getting things right. And now in the playoffs, it's constant turnovers and mental mistakes and small details, not being prepared on the coaching staff. I always joke, Ryan, that the Ravens are just going to get outcoached. I said they're going to get outcoached this weekend. They were outcoached. They were more prepared. So do they need a leadership change? I'm not quite sure because I am a little too emotionally invested. But you would never see this with like a Belichick team. You would never see this with a Steelers, well, a previous day Steelers team. The recent versions of the Steelers has been pretty woeful, but you know what I mean. Those disciplined teams, you don't see this out of the Eagles. You don't see it out of the Chiefs. And I do not like Sirianni, but you don't see this stuff out of I'm just wondering, is it time?
Yeah, so I'm glad you bring up the Belichick comparison because that's actually exactly where I was going to go. So yes, it is true that throughout most of the Patriots dynasty, a defining factor was we're going to do all the little things right. We're not going to make mistakes because, Belichick has talked about this at sort of his philosophy in interviews as well, where in any given football game, there's going to be like 3 or 4 plays that determine the outcome. We are going to get everything right on every play to make sure it's not the 3 or 4 plays that we make a mistake on that determine the outcome, right? So yes, it is all of that incredibly important for a winning football team to have success in January to get through the playoffs. Yes, absolutely. But the one thing I will say about those Belichick teams, and not just those Belichick teams, but those Brady teams, is that as soon as specifically Tom Brady was gone here in New England, that all kind of went away. Like that 2021 Mac Jones rookie season, the 2022 season, and then even after, with Belichick still there and Tom gone, there was a shift in the team in terms of how tight they kept everything. It was very noticeable as a Patriots fan watching week to week how much looser everything was in terms of the mistakes and the penalties once Brady was gone, is what I'm trying to say. So I don't know that it all goes up to the coach and the leadership. Well, certainly the leadership, but that's not just the head coach, right? That's also the quarterback. And this isn't me sitting here and saying that Lamar Jackson is a bad leader and needs to like fix the Ravens culture all by himself or
heard it here first
of the sort. I want to be very clear. I am not saying that.
Clip it. Cade, clip that.
But it is a factor that we should be considering. So I'm generally very anti. We just had a bad playoff loss, so we should fire our coach. I feel like we have this conversation with at least one team every year, and it's dumb pretty much every time we do it. Because any coach or anyone you bring in is, on average, overwhelmingly likely going to be much worse and much less competent. That's just the reality of the NFL coaching talent pool. and betting on something totally unknown over someone that has sustained success, or at least some modicum of success over a long period of time. And yeah, the reality is we can say all we want about building culture and limiting mistakes and getting the little things right. It's a really small sample size sport, guys. Like, fully writing coaching and QB narratives just off of 1 or 2 or 3 playoff games over this huge over a guy's entire career, and ignoring the 95% of other stuff that he's put on the field, that he's put on tape, that he's put in the stat sheet. I've just never been that interested in it. So okay. Yes, I think you're crazy, or I think you're too emotionally invested as a Ravens fan. I'm saying it again, Thomas, 5 minutes after I apologize for saying that. I would not be looking to move on from Harbaugh or anything of the sort. I think, unfortunately, this is just kind of what we have to deal with as NFL fans.
I think that's fair. If I were to make a point, if it comes down to Harbaugh or Monken, though, how would you let another good offensive coordinator walk out the door?
Oh, you're saying promote Monken to head coach?
Well,
yeah, I don't know that that's the worst idea. Yeah,
I'm just saying potentially if it came down to it. All right, I'm trying to cope. A little bit of this is a look in the inner turmoil of myself as a fan. When I'm looking at this, if the difference is to keep Harbaugh for one more run and just end up letting him go again over the next playoff thing, or they mutually apart, I think that conversation maybe should be had. I mean, hell, keep Harbaugh on as part of the front office staff. This is a Bruce Arians situation. Who knows? But tough. It's real tough, because remember with Brady, he was like, "Hey, Arians, you're either fired or you're in the GM spot." Like, he kicked his ass off the sideline. So pretty funny, actually, now that you think about it. Buck, anything to add?
Yeah, I think, one of my least favorite things is when a team, like, you're a fan of a team and the first thing they lose, and the first thing you do is like blame the coach or the referees. I hate that. It's like the Cowboys thing. Like, as soon as they lose Jason Garrett, they'll be better. Then they lose Jason Garrett, they still don't win anything. I don't know. I don't follow the Ravens every day or very closely to know like how their leadership is, right? I don't know if Marlon Humphrey is this elite leader on defense. Like, I don't know, but I don't really think they should like fire Harbaugh. I think that's pretty crazy. I mean, he would get a job the next day. And I think that's always like kind of the litmus test of if you made a wrong decision or not. If the guy's going to get 5 job offers the next day after you fire him, it's probably not the best thing. And we bring up things like Tom Brady, like the Patriots. Well, they had Tom Brady and they had the greatest coach of all time. And then Nick Sirianni. I mean, the fans just wanted him fired about 8 months ago. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's always like when they lost to the Bucs in the playoffs and everyone wanted them gone. People wanted them gone before the bye week of this season. And now they're a game away from the Super Bowl. So I think that just changes. Like, it's just an emotionally invested thing, right? Like, I mean, my team hasn't played a meaningful game before Halloween in about 10 years. So I can't really speak on how a loss would feel like that. But I know that I've done that before. Like, I wanted Tom Coughlin fired and everything. So I don't think so. I don't think Harbaugh should go. But I mean, maybe in a couple of years if it keeps happening.
I agree. I think you have one of probably the best players the NFL has ever seen. One of the most transcendent players the NFL has ever seen. And you just can't quite get there. And it's always small mistakes. There's something to be said about that. I will say I loved when they came out at halftime. And I think the sideline report, this is just getting into a completely side thing. The sideline reporters talking to coaches after halftime is fucking dumb. They're not going to tell you anything. Stop asking. Hey, coach, you're down 45. You've gotten absolutely shit kicked on national TV today. How does it feel? Thanks, Susie. We just got to, play a little tighter defense and score some points. And, I think we really got a good chance here. Thanks. They're not going to be like, yeah, we just got our shit pushed in and we're getting manhandled. We suck. Like, they're never going to say like enough. But I will say the tidbit that Harbaugh said when she asked, what did you say? He goes, nothing. Lamar did. And they came out in the second half and they looked like the dominant. If they played that way from the first snap of the game, they probably win that game by 21 points. So hearing that it was Lamar that did the talking, I think you're right in terms of the maturity and the details and the little things. It just begs the question of when is failing epically like that enough after multiple times? But I would also say that I do not think they should have been the favorites on the road. Buffalo is
it was a really tough draw though in the division
It was.
round.
It was. Yep.
Draw.
Yeah, it's not like the Bills aren't ass, right? Like that's also why I say stay away from team Twitter pages. Stay away from the back and forth between Bills fan 3129 and fucking Lamar Lifer 4267. Stay away from that and you'll live a happier life. I will say Simon says with the $5 super chat, keep fighting the good fight, brothers. Sorry about your Ravens, Tommy. I appreciate that, Simon. I saw your other questions. We're going to get that in. Let's move on. Well, actually, you know what we're going to do? We're going to take a quick break. And then when we come back, we're going to ask a question about the Detroit Lions fan base. Because again, Twitter got me thinking today. You are not going to want to miss it. All right. Are the Lions down bad? Because Lions fans have not been taking the Ben Johnson leaving to Chicago thing well. And when I mean not well, I mean, and I tweeted this out today because I was in complete disbelief. I said, are Lions fans actually mad that the team put up that offensive performance? They praised a guy I put for 2 years. It was actually 3. For being the out-of-the-box thinker, running weird plays at weird times, and basically screaming the Kylo Ren more meme every single game. After watching their quarterback turn the ball over 4 times and their defense die every week on the field, slowly, is the guy that took their offense from the gutter to one of the best the NFL has ever seen. He was called a genius by everyone in Detroit fandom, and he did his job on Sunday with 31 points and 520 yards, over 200 yards of rushing. That is a 98th percentile outcome in the divisional round of the playoffs. They just happened to win up against a team of seemingly destiny and the greatest rookie quarterback to ever play in NFL history. And now I am seeing nothing and hearing nothing but, he wasn't that good. It was his fault. He called the dumb play. I've even had internal conversations where it wasn't actually Ben Johnson. This is crazy talk to me because all we've heard about is keep him in the building. Don't let him leave. Please don't. We knew he was gone. Now, maybe it's just because it's Chicago and it's a division thing. And maybe I'm dead inside and I don't possess that kind of. I wasn't mad at Patrick Queen for going and playing for the Steelers. He doesn't owe Baltimore anything. They didn't offer him a contract. What did he want him to do? Stay a free agent? Like I don't have that in me. So you can call me a bad fan. You could call me whatever you want. I'm dead inside. So I don't have that feeling of rage when I see something over another division rival. I don't. I'm happy for him. I want to. So maybe it's me, but it doesn't feel like it's being taken well. What I will ask, though, how do we apply this seemingly groundbreaking offensive situation to Detroit, which we were buy. All the Lions players, buy them all. Every single one of them. Great, amazing. And now we have nothing but question marks. The offensive line coach looks like he could possibly be poached as well. How are we looking at the Detroit Lions in Dynasty? Let's apply it to a Dynasty show because I do one day just want to be like a talking head football show for one episode because I think it's fun. But let's apply this to Dynasty as well. A lot of Lions fans are taking this news well. A lot of Bears fans are taking this really well. So I am imagining Chicago Bears players get moved up boards, especially guys like DJ Moore. He's the Amon-Ra St. Brown. I can see him jumping ridiculously high. Rome Odunze going to jump pretty high, even though he's already doing, Buck, you and I talked about this last week. Rome Odunze is carrying a lot of dynasty weight right now. Not in the Keenan Allen way either. And then how do we approach this from the David Montgomerys, the Jameson Williams, the Sam Laportas? I have no fear in like the Amon-Ra St. Browns, but we're talking about a coach that quite literally maximized every single player on every single snap year in and year out there. So Ryan, I'll send it to you first. How are you applying this to the Lions? Is it being overblown? Is it being appropriately talked about? And how do we view this with the Bears as well? 2-part question.
Yeah, so I'm going to add a third part to it. I am going to give a quick just NFL talking head non-dynasty opinion too, since you did it for a 3-minute monologue, Thomas. I feel like I have to get my word in here too. And my only word is specifically on Ben Johnson. We do this, it feels like every year, where there is a boy wonder offensive mastermind who just fails on one particular big moment in the playoffs, probably going all the way back to Kyle Shanahan in the 28-3 game. If you remember, there was a lot of criticism for him not running the ball enough, I believe, in that game. It's been a little while, but yeah, and that was the narrative in terms of, yeah, he's actually a fake fraud. Like, we're glad that he's gone now. And, you know, he's done, I would say, pretty decent for himself in his next role. Hasn't quite gotten back to the Super Bowl win yet. But regardless, I don't care about one play samples for a play caller. And also, I credit to Steve Palazzolo and Sam Monson. They were the first ones I heard give this take. But in like pre-hindsight, the Jameson Williams trick play call was not necessarily bad. It kind of played off a trick play they had run earlier on. Was it bad for Jameson Williams to actually throw it and not just throw it out of bounds once it was clear that they hadn't bitten on it? Yes, that's on Jameson Williams. You can say that's on Ben Johnson for even letting Jameson Williams have that decision in that moment, putting him in that position when it's Jameson Williams. But I think in a vacuum, I kind of understand what he was going for. I don't think this was like a total boneheaded call. We would have all had our jaws on the floor if it worked and said, oh my God, he's the best ever. This is crazy. He's in his bag. We've done that literally 20 times at different points this season. Sorry. So NFL stuff out of the way. Moving on to fantasy, it matters a lot.
Okay.
Offensive coordinators and play callers are very, very important. I will say very specifically at the quarterback position is where I would kind of start here. So Jared Goff, basically his entire career where he's had success has been in either the Sean McVay offense. Again, notice I say when he had success, or he's been in the Ben Johnson offense, which kind of the entire point of it was to recreate the Sean McVay offense and the successes that Goff had in that, right? So, yes, I think it matters a lot that Johnson's now gone and we have uncertainty about what the scheme is going to look like going forward. Now, they still have one of the best offensive lines in the league. They still have, I would say, well above average weapons. This is still a situation where a quarterback can succeed. But, I mean, the defense is hopefully going to get healthier, should be better at the start of 2025 than it was down the stretch of this year. As a fantasy asset, that has been a big deal for Goff just because of the combination of a low pass rate over expectation and the Lions leading so many games. That has really limited him as a fantasy asset. He was top 5, top 6 in fantasy points per dropback this year. Just not enough dropbacks for it to matter for most of the season, or for him to be much more than like a kind of QB2-ish type of player. So yeah, I think it matters for Jared Goff's efficiency a lot. If we get like the worst case scenario of the defense is still good and the offense is not to Goff's strengths, then yeah, I mean, not only can Goff implode, but kind of the whole house of cards can implode there. So yeah, I am worried about it. I will say though, if you're a Lions fan and your whole thing is like Dan Campbell's this genius that's created this culture and is like found all of these coordinators and coaches that are so talented, like has just plucked them from obscurity and created this environment where everyone can succeed, then you should believe in Dan Campbell to continue to steer this ship, even if he loses both of his coordinators. Is that ever easy for an NFL team? No, obviously not. But if you love Dan Campbell, Lions fans, as much as you all told me you did 2 weeks ago, then you shouldn't be that worried, I would say. As far as the Bears, it's really tricky because, yes, DeAndre Swift is there. You're inclined to be like, okay, Ben Johnson running back, let's go. But Ben Johnson literally played Jamal Williams over DeAndre Swift like earlier in his Lions tenure for starters. So that would be pretty bad, I would say. Very likely that they draft somebody, very likely that they sign somebody. I would not be buying the DeAndre Swift like dead man's bounce at all. The receivers and Caleb Williams, definitely more interesting. I have some trust in Ben Johnson to build something that's going to work for his specific players. I wouldn't try to pattern match too much in terms of, oh, well, he's had success at the tight end position, so is it Cole Kmet or anything like that? Probably the one place I would pattern match a little bit is specifically the slot receiver. And to be clear, we don't know who exactly that's going to be yet. So when I say pattern match, I really mean keep your ears open for beat reports, or if they sign somebody and make it obvious who the slot receiver is going to be. But Johnson has been on record going back years that the slot is kind of his favorite position, and that he thinks that having a really good slot receiver lets you do the most things schematically. Scott Barrett was tweeting about this earlier today and reminded me kind of that being a big Ben Johnson ethos going back years. So that's kind of what I'd have my ear to the ground for. Yes, it's good for Caleb Williams. It's good for Odunze. It's good for DJ Moore, just from an offensive floor perspective. But I don't want to go too crazy with any of their dynasty values and really paying up for them before we have a fuller picture of what this offensive personnel is actually going to look like.
I like that. I have a little bit of a different take that I tweeted out earlier, and Randy Mitchell says Nate Tice has been big on Odunze being a power slot, which would obviously catapult his usage and value.
I should also say that Odunze's yards per out run from the slot was close to double, or maybe more than double what it was from the outside this past year. I mean, we see that kind of a lot with receivers that are maybe a little bit more raw. It is definitely easier to win in the slot on average, I would say. That's super oversimplifying. Someone that really knows ball can take me to task on that probably.
You don't watch ball, Ryan. You don't know what's easy.
But yeah, I mean, especially if you're a larger frame, guys definitely can succeed there more or find it easier. So not super surprising. Does that mean that Ben Johnson's going to use Odunze in the slot? We don't know. But yeah, I mean, worth thinking about, certainly.
Anything to add, Buck?
Yeah, so there's a lot there. I'll start off with the whole like coping Lions thing. I just went through this. Like, so obviously when he goes to the Bears, they just lose the biggest game of his life. I just did this with Juan Soto leaving my team. The first thing was like, oh my God, he really went to the Mets. And then my second move was like, oh, he can't catch. 5 years he'll be a DH. Like it's just a cope. So you just like be like, oh yeah, Ben Johnson sucks now. He lost the biggest game of his career. I just did this. Like my first thing was really sad. My second thing was saying that he's awful outfielder and he can't catch, and he'll be the contract will be awful. So I think you do is like being over emotional as a fan. But I'll go with the fantasy stuff. I'll say I'm like everything what Ryan said with Goff. I'm really nervous about Goff because I talk about like when we talked on the market report, when we talked about who we think will win the playoffs, I was like, man, sometimes Jared Goff just turns back into 2019 Jared Goff. And I think he's a better quarterback now than he was then. He's played a lot more football. I think he's better. But I'm definitely worried, like, if he doesn't have that guy in his ear telling him, exactly where to throw the ball. That's ultimately why McVay moved off of him and they added the picks to go get Stafford. because he was a puppet for McVay. And I think that's disrespectful now. I think he's better than that, but definitely worry about him and pretty much everyone in the offense besides Gibbs and Monroe and Montgomery. I think he'll probably still have a good role, and he'll be cheap enough. For the Bears, I'm interested in Caleb. I already thought he was kind of cheap. He was like at the 211 when we were seeing some of the ADP. And when we drafted, I had him around like 205 to 201, and I think that's probably where he'll go, and I'm fine with that. As far as the receivers, not too much interest in them. I wanted to like DJ Moore, but if he's going to keep going up, I mean, he's like probably like the new Terry McLaurin now. He gets a lot of cop-outs with like, oh, he has never had a quarterback, never had a coach, and he just has a lot of people that really like him. If he's going to jump up to like the 4th round into like, top 20 wide receivers instead of back end of top 24, then I wouldn't be interested. And then with Odunze, I mean, we know how I feel about him. I think obviously a new coach, but it doesn't change the 1.2 yards per route run and like the bucket he's in. He's still in a poor buck after his rookie season, and you already have to pay for him. He held top 18 Dynasty receiver. People are asking for the 104 plus. This is before the hiring. He's almost worth 2 firsts before this. Like last week when we talked, he was going for around a 2 first eval, being in a bucket of a really poor bucket. There's some good players, most of them aren't. And you're just betting completely on projection. And this isn't a Drake London or AJ Brown situation where they're elite in every single peripheral, just never had, a voluminous pass offense. He's not been good in anything. It doesn't mean he won't be good, right? It's just like the JSN thing. But I already had to pay for Rome Odunze on I don't want to say face planet, but he didn't, but pretty close. I even have to pay more. Like now he's in the middle of the 3rd round. Definitely out on him. Would be interested in DJ Moore. And then I guess if they bring Keenan back, pretty interested in him if he's going to be cheap. Or whoever, like you said, we don't know who's going to be the slot receiver. I really don't think it would be DJ Moore.
Right.
I do quickly want to just pick up on what you said about Odunze and JSN. I do think that the season JSN just had does ensure that you're never going to get the Rome Odunze discount or anything close to the discount we got on JSN because like it or not, the fantasy market does pattern match in that type of way. We were already making the comparison before Odunze's rookie season that, this will be just like JSN. And that's why you can't draft him in a rookie draft or whatever. Like that was the argument.
I remember that too.
Now we will fully shift to, you got to buy low on Rome Odunze. Like he's got Ben Johnson now. Like, look what JSN just did. But the reality is these are 2 very different players. They had very different profiles. JSN was, at least from an analytical perspective, one of the top 5 prospects at the wide receiver position of the last few years, at least just off of that sophomore season he had in that relatively small sample that you could quibble over. But Odunze never did anything in college, anything close to what JSN accomplished in that sophomore year. I just want to be careful with those comparisons that others are going to be making this offseason.
No, for sure. I want to add to the JSN thing too. Just because JSN hit in year 2, that doesn't make him a good bet. Like he still wasn't a good bet going into year 2 with his peripherals. So we got to watch like betting on what technically is an outlier. And what you said about Rome as a, analytical prospect, he was the weakest of the big 3. He was like, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but he was, around like he had target share concerns. Like he was like around 20%. We thought it was because of, Polk and McMillan, which, I mean, those guys got day 2 capital, so they're real players, but they're not, they didn't have good rookie seasons. So I agree with that, and I agree with the JSN thing. I think we got to watch making comparisons like that. It's similar to like I hate the whole when a coach goes somewhere, we do, he's going to play the Monroe role. He's going to play like we wanted to do the James White role in the Patriots offense every single year since James White retired, and it never happened. It's just kind of is what it is. I hate those type of comparisons. But what do you got, Thomas?
You're not wrong. I want to point out that I see everyone's comments. We're going to get to the comments as soon as we get through this little bit, so sit tight. We're going to go right through the comments, and after that, we're going to answer all the questions that we've been asked in the Discord and get out of here. Trust me, we see you. We love you. If you have a question, leave one. We'll do our best to answer. I will say there's the one thing that is not being talked about enough in terms of their offense. But before I get into that, I just want to point out, I pulled up on Dynasty Data Lab all the startups from January 1st to now. with rookie picks involved, Rome Odunze is going wide receiver 17 at the 412, and DJ Moore is going at wide receiver 23 after Pickens, which is kind of crazy, in the middle of the 6th round. So I expect DJ Moore to get a bump back up. I will say I'm interested in the tight end spot in Chicago. Cole Kmet is often made fun of for good reason. He either scores 3 touchdowns on 4 catches, has 30 yards, or he does nothing, it feels like. However, the tight end position has been pretty important with Ben Johnson, but is that just having Sam Laporta? I mean, they drafted Sam Laporta high. We've got a couple of tight ends in this draft class, like Fannin, Warren, a couple potential elite receiving tight ends. Do they try to add one? Or is Cole Kmet the sleeper buy on the Chicago Bears offense because he's so dirt cheap and could have a major impact in a new role? I think it's worth at least noting. I am not sitting here saying that now Cole Kmet is Sam Laporta, because I know, Buck, you just said you hate that. When it comes to usage, though, we look at tight end 18 on Cole Kmet right now, and a tight end that gets a usage boost when you're drafting with tight end 18. If you get tight end 10 or tight end 9-esque production, that is a massive win when you're talking about a 13th round startup pick. So just, to me, that's something I'm going to be interested in looking at. How cheap is Cole Kmet? Can you add him? If it's late enough in drafts, he's generally an asset that you can just push to the side, add in as a throw-in. Nobody likes Cole Kmet. There's like Cooter Doodle on Twitter loves Cole Kmet. It's like been a bit. And she might be the only person that I can know of in recorded history that is part of the Cole Kmet fan club, actually. So I think he's worth taking note of. And we'll see what happens with the draft. Like I said, there's a couple. But it's not like there's like a free agent tight end out there that's game breaking that I can think of. So just a note. It's a small note. It's not game breaking. But
How pissed when he gets cut.
No, someone's still holding on to him because they drafted him in the 3rd round. Let's be honest. He'll never actually be cheap. But
can I quickly push back on Cole Kmet? I'm sorry.
Sure.
I can't. Yeah. I can't let Cole Kmet positivity just go unchallenged on any show that I'm on.
Sure.
I will say, in terms of the Ben Johnson tight end thing, my recollection is that TJ Hawkinson was unlocked and became a much more productive player after he got away from Ben Johnson. Now, obviously, offensive competency and pass rate and all of that kind of factors into that as well.
Yeah, he went to Minnesota.
But it's not ultra clear to me that tight end is always going to be featured in a Ben Johnson offense. I mean, even on those early Lions offenses, Hawkinson was pretty clearly the top target, but he was still never putting up like super notable fantasy performances, right? Until he got to Minnesota. That was when he really popped. Aside from that, I had another anti-Cole Kmet point, but that I don't know. That can probably stand on its own as anti-Cole Kmet.
So Cole Kmet, or not Cole Kmet, TJ Hawkinson was traded on November 1st of 2022. Keep in mind that in 2021, TJ Hawkinson was the tight end 15, and he only played in 12 games. He had the knee injury. I believe it was the knee injury, the first one. But before that, I mean, you're talking about 29 points, 24 points, 19 points, 14, 24, 14, 14, 17 in tight end premium leagues.
That's a top 10 pick, though, like a good prospect.
But what I'm saying is, it's not like we're taking Cole Kmet in the 9th round. Like, if you take Cole Kmet in the 9th round on a projection, you've jumped the shark. You've missed.
Yeah. What you're saying about like he's a throw-in that people aren't going to be protective of. Yeah, that's fine. But I I also don't think that this was the other point. I also don't think the Bears are going to be that protective of him. It's from what I understand, like a fairly deep tight end class. There are guys that could be drafted and be productive for fantasy. And also Cole Kmet has no guaranteed money on his contract starting in 2025, which is funny because I remember making fun of the Bears for doing that extension, and we're already at the point where the extension doesn't matter. So maybe a lesson to myself to not freak out about extensions so much for players I don't think are good. But yeah.
It's funny. Just a little thing. Thought it might be worth at least discussing. Let's take our last break before we get into the AMAs. You guys asked a lot of great questions. We have a lot of great comments. Quick break, and when we come back, we are going to dive in, not going to want to miss it, as Joe Marino would say. I'm not going to steal this thing. Sit tight. We'll be right back. I was going to say it, and then someone last week commented the fact that I used it after I edited their podcast. So, Joe, I will not steal your steez, if you would. I guess I just didn't do it justice. All right, let's get into some of these questions. Wesley asked, should I ship off Laporte in a package for McBride now that Ben Johnson is gone, or could this ramp his usage? I don't think we're going to get a better situation than we had previously. I think you already should have been shipping off Laporta for McBride. Good luck. It's going to cost you a lot. I would do this, though. Absolutely. McBride is, as Ryan so elegantly put it, the tight end 1B to Brock Bowers' tight end 1A. And if anyone wants to challenge that, McBride finished the better point per game than Bowers did. So suck it. Let's get a feel around the room. I'll start with you, Andy. Is this something you would suggest doing?
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, but I don't know like what a package is. There are multiple tiers like apart to me. So, I mean, if it's realistic, but I think for me, if I have McBride, I want like a first and a player plus. So it depends on the package. Like it's just really hard to replace a player like McBride. Even tight end 2 to tight end 3 is a big deal, especially just how they score points.
Yeah.
Laporta's kind of tight end 3 off merit, like off age, and just kind of because he has to be, not because he was really elite as a rookie, and then second half of the year was good, and he had a really crazy catch in the playoffs. And
he was
last game,
sure.
Yeah, he was, but we don't even know how the offense is going to run, and we don't know.
I agree.
So I mean, of course, but it depends on the pack. If it's a realistic package, like if it's what market should be, then I mean that's going to cost a lot. But if it's something, I mean, always try for sure.
I think it comes down to, can your roster handle depreciating your team's value to get one asset?
Yeah,
I think that's really what it comes down to. Ryan, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, not really. Yeah, you guys pretty much nailed it. Yeah, as you said, I see McBride as not really that far off of Bowers in terms of what I think his dynasty value should be. So yeah, if I can add a first to Laporta to get McBride, I'm pretty happy to do that.
Yeah, it's definitely going to cost you more, though. Be wary of that. Joe said, Joss, I am butchering that name. I'm so sorry. He says, hey, what site do I look up other fantasy managers' profiles? This has been an interesting question. I've talked about it on the show a lot, and that you should do that. There's a couple different sites. You can do it on Dynasty Data Lab. You can do it, I believe, on Dynasty Daddy as well, and South Harmon. So there's a couple of different sites that you can do. Some give you different information. They're not all entirely accurate because I find they don't count a lot of your co-managed leagues, and I have a lot of them. So I find myself missing some information quite often, but they are good tools if you want to get a vibe for the people in your league and you want to get an idea of kind of what trades. You can go look up some trades too that people have made. You really dive into those 3 sites, you'll have quite a bit. It's definitely an eye-opening kind of experience. Jamie,
you can do it on Q-Trade Cut as well and see all the whole league.
Yeah, there you go. There's another one. Jamie says, can we start adding the Chiefs officiating crew on our fantasy teams?
No, I'm not talking about this topic. I go to my Twitter if you want to see my take on it. I am not I will absolutely not engage in Chiefs ref discourse on this show. This is my one escape from it the entire week. My mentions have been blowing up.
Good thing you mentioned it.
Do anything wrong.
The segment not listed on the show is pulling up Ryan's Chiefs tweet. I have that right here. No, I think it would just be like doop, and show Ryan had dropped off the call or something. It's just,
I'll tell you a funny story about my Chiefs tweet, which
yeah.
So the reason that exists is because Scott Barrett is very firmly on the other side of the Chiefs debate. He is very he really thinks that the ref like screw job is in. It's all the refs. He's like super.
He's a conspiracy theorist. Yeah.
Yeah. He asked me to go pull some data to prove him right. And I went and pulled the data and it proved him wrong. And he was like, oh, well, so I was like, I'm going to tweet this if you aren't. Like, I don't care. Everyone can be mad at me. And that, I mean, everyone besides Chiefs fans are pretty mad at me right now. So I got what I asked for, I guess.
Yeah. You know what? No, I'm going to talk about it for a second. You see, there's something to it because I've made a lot of jokes. I got into it with Brett Whitefield about it. Josh Allen flops like crazy. That dude is a generational LeBroner on the field for a guy who's like 6'5", 250. Like you touch him and the arms go up, the head flies back. Mahomes with the late. There's no rule against it. So like, got to keep in mind, I'm pro cheating. All right. Like steroids should be in baseball. You should steal signs. You should film the team's practice. Like I'm pro cheating, right? Get the best edge that you like. Get the edge that you can. Winning is hard, whatever. It sucks when it happens. Like it's soft. It's so soft. It's Charmin soft. It's SAWFT soft, like soft, bad. But there's no rule against it. So get the 15 yards. You should draw the penalty. It sucks. It sucks that not everybody gets the call. Jackson didn't get the call when he got hip drop tackled 4 steps out of bounds. No call. You do that to Mahomes and that person's being put to death immediately, probably in the stadium parking lot. But get the penalty. It doesn't bother me. There's no rule against it. Until there's a rule against it, do it. In my opinion. It's probably not a hot topic opinion for everyone listening, but there's no rule against it. You win. Do the thing that you need to do to win. I don't know.
The fake run out of bounds bothers me.
It bothers me that he slows down and then gets hit. And then look, if anyone wonders what my credentials are for knowing if somebody's flopping or not, trained professional wrestler, 10 years. I can make, getting hit by a feather pillow look like I got hit by an anvil. All right. I'm trained to do this. I know the tells. This is what I did for many years in spandex in front of a room full of people. All right.
The defense slows down. The defense slows down, doesn't hit him, let him run another 20. Like I don't. Yeah. I mean, we took away the fake Kenny. The Kenny Pickett slide got banned, but we're not banning this. So
what a move! What a move by Vanilla Vic in college, Kenny Pickett, and insane. But yeah, so to me, it's just a thing. It doesn't bother me. It bothers me that because it's soft, and I get mad when it happens against the Ravens. But like, there's no rule against it, so use it until they stop it. Really, in my opinion, that's just my opinion. But again, I'm pro cheating, so steal signs, steal the playbook, do whatever you got to do.
As long as you mean steal signs normal and not electronically, because I'm gonna push back there. If we're Astros using the computer, we're not going.
Oh, banging trash cans, do whatever you got to do.
If we're stealing signs from second base, that's fine. That's fair game. But if we're using things to get them, I'm not. I'm pushing back there.
I like the guy sitting in like the wall of Fenway, right, with the binoculars behind the fence, trying to get the sign.
I feel like this conversation has taken a turn to attack me as a Boston sports fan once again, and I do not appreciate it. And as I said,
fan and a Blue Jays fan can't
not engaging in Chiefs ref discourse, not engaging in Boston teams cheating discourse.
I'm pro cheat. I'm on your side. I'm on your side. Bill Belichick should have been scheming all the Bengals practices. Like I'm on your side. Trust. I believe I'm all about it. I love it. Next question. Simon says, is it just my leagues that are developing a weird buzz around the 27 first? Is it the right take? People are already out on 26 and then 27 because of those 2 wide receivers. Well, I will tell you that those 2 wide receivers, pretty worth being in on, if you ask me. But this, like, I believe it was Ryan Williams and Jeremiah Smith.
Yeah.
2 phenomenal wide. We don't even know if they're coming out in 27. They might stay in school and be 28.
Jeremiah Smith kind of said he was coming out in 2 years yesterday when he had a slip up. When he said he was going to win 3 more national championships, he said, "Oh shit, 2."
That's funny. But it could be Arch Manning. We don't know how long he's staying. He could be in 27. He may not come out. So I'm in on 27 picks all the time because they're the cheapest they're ever going to be. And the minute I can trade for 28 picks, I'm going to do that. At the start of this year, I traded Cooper Kupp everywhere I had him for every 27 first that I could get. Even if I was on a contending team, if my team I thought was going to be contending, and in this one specific case, it was Lamar, it had Henry, it had unreal team this year. I still smash accepted that deal when it was sent to me. I'll always fight to get those later first. So I don't know if your league specifically is just into it because the Natty just happened and we've had like amazing, stellar 18-year-old wide receivers doing things we've never seen before. I don't know if that's the case, but especially with NIL, especially with the transfer portal, and that those picks should really technically be the cheapest they're ever going to be every day, right? Every day they get more and more expensive. I'm always just interested in acquiring them for as cheap as I can get them. As for what player hype, I think if you're trying to predict when a player's coming out, I think you're out of your goddamn mind now because we don't know. We do not know. I said this when the NIL was getting introduced on the Full Tilt Devy podcast when it existed, that I thought the NIL was going to change everything. It's changed everything in how we approach prospects, early declares, late declares, school transfers, production company. It's changed everything. So to be able to predict 2027, I think you're out of your mind. The only thing we do know is that 2027 draft picks are going to gain value. Right now, the class looks pretty dope. And see that I want them. I want those picks. I'm not out on the 26 thing. I think that's a little silly. Buck, you and I talked about this in the market report. We loved players in this draft class that have already gone back. So if you love them this year and not next year, like if you loved Nick Singleton and wanted him to come out this year, and now you're like, oh, I'm out on Nick Singleton because in 2026, before he plays and gets hurt, I think you've lost the plot. Buy 26 picks too. Buy 27. Buy draft picks. It's not even a specific. Buy them. Maybe not this year. I'm going to dial it back a little bit. But buy 26. Buy 27. Buy 28 when you can. Get every second round pick you can off a Buck as a throw-in. Because he tosses those out quick. Yeah, exactly. You already got rid of them. Second, you could get rid of them. But get those seconds because guess what? When drafts show up or when it becomes 2027, I'm not going to be mad. I got 4 27 firsts. I've got 5 27 seconds. I've got 3 28 seconds I can play around with, an extra 28 first. I'm never mad when it comes down to that. Honestly, I've never been mad that I had a draft pick. So that's my advice. I don't know. It's not just your league. People are going crazy for it, but long-winded answer. No, you should just be wanting to purchase.
Only thing I want to add here is, if this is if you're listening and that's your league that people are crazy about 27, not as crazy about 26 anymore, go buy 26 picks. It's that simple. Like that. I have never felt hurt as a dynasty manager by not having strong convictions on a class overall 1, 2, 3+ years out. That is never hurting you as a dynasty manager. What is always going to help you is buying picks that are later down the road. They always gain value. I don't care about the specific values of what I think each class is going to be this far out. Absolutely. I barely care about it for 2025, and I should right now. Like this is about the time when I start caring about perceived class quality, honestly. So yeah, just do whatever the market isn't doing. And if your market right now in your league is 26 picks or at a discount compared to 27s, go buy 26s. It's just that simple for me.
Yep. Smash. Absolute smash. Buck?
No, I agree. I mean, I was just on my soapbox on the market report about the hating the class thing, the protecting the class. So I don't want to do that again. And with the 27s, like if people are overcharging for them because of 2 players, those are only 2 picks and likely to be the top 2 picks. So it's not like if people are going to, obviously we don't know picks are going to be late, but if a super team is charging you 2 first to get to 27 first, like there's no point on doing that. And like you said, with the players leaving, like both Penn State running backs go back. We'll keep saying that, probably especially at the running back position. Players also show up in classes that we don't know. Like Jaden Daniels wasn't in this last class until he was. So 26 are perceived bad until week 3 of the college football season, and it's not perceived bad anymore. Just like last year. So yeah, I don't like doing the projecting the class thing, but if people are overcharging for 27s, I just pass and buy 26s. I even buy 25s if they're this readily available, like it seems.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, absolutely agreed. Love all that. Next up, Easy B, you said just got this offered on the love side. Cannot see what you're posting, so keep that in mind. Simon said, I was thinking about selling high on my recent Odunze hype. It's not my favorite thing because I subscribe to reception, and they really like him long term. I think Odunze plus JJ McCarthy could land Hurts. That's pretty easy. But only saw it because the Caleb owner also has Hurts. Probably an easy reject. I'm probably just holding JJ McCarthy and Odunze right now and seeing what happens. But I think you're on the right path. There. I want to go and have a look. Big Diaz Energy. This is why I finally caught y'all live. Appreciate you for tuning in. Really appreciate that. You can DM me on Discord. I'll help you find it. It's El Nostradamus as usual. Absolutely. You said, what's the Anvil's ADP? That's pretty good. He said Heath is getting gaslit again. I don't think so. And I want all those 2031 picks. Love that. He says, let him cook. Love that. And then he says, isn't the purpose of picks is to store the value or shift value, not much actually making the picks. This is a great topic that's not often talked about. You don't have to make the pick. And guess what? Rebuilding isn't just holding 10 rookie picks and making every rookie. It's using those picks to go and get players to shift the tides of war and going and winning. You could have a young roster that's high value, but also not productive. Like it's possible, and you don't want that. Eventually, at some point, you have to make moves to go buy players to win. And you absolutely nailed it. They're the safest assets. They gain value. It's up to you to make them work for you.
Yeah,
I had a team. I had a team this last offseason that I acquired 8 first-round picks. I sold them all. I made the championship. I didn't make any of the picks. So you just want I went out and got Josh Allen for 3 firsts. Like you want to acquire those picks to get the big players. Like that's the whole point, to get those big fish, not make all the picks. To get the Josh Allens, to get those first-round startup picks. And sometimes the only way you could get them is with multiple first-round picks, like the Amon-Ra's, all them guys. So.
Yeah, sometimes you could even trade Jaden Reed in the first to get Amon-Ra.
And get a second back.
We'll make fun of Jacob too much, but just an easy punching bag trade because Buck's on the show today, so I feel like we got to let him do it. I don't know why it's not showing either easy. I don't see on any of the bits, but he said, having said that, I want all of Buckler's seconds. You could get him if you had him, especially if you got a running back. He'll take those. He needs them. God, if Buck could just get 8 points out of his RB2, he'd be the happiest. Every running back in season. I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna check the waivers. You won't find him. He's already in. I started him twice last week.
I had 100% Sasir McCormick 3 weeks before everyone wanted to add him off the waiver line.
Because you need him. So funny. The way you live with running backs is like how gambling addicts are with roulette. Any week could be your week, but most weeks it's not.
Funny thing is, I've done one trade this offseason so far in a league, and it was sending my 26 second for Tony Pollard.
Of course it was. Of course it was. Oh, God. All right. Let's get into some of the Discord questions that were asked. Let's go. Okay, we had one from Sad Cubs fan on Discord. How much value do you have in your QB3 year by year in the Geno or Stafford range? Purdy, Goff, have 2 quarterbacks and buy cheap points as needed? Would you know you're contending? So this is interesting. I always say you shouldn't hold a high value QB3. To me, it's just holding value that you don't need. But then, to be honest, a lot of the times I don't have that luxury because I punt my second quarterback so often. So for me, this isn't necessarily a question for me. I'll just say I will never draft 3 quarterbacks in the first 4 rounds of a startup. I think holding quarterbacks values that heavily on your roster is bad, especially if you want to win. But I will pass this on to the other guys because I don't have a strong take on this except for storing value in one position that you can't use is not for me. I'll pass this over to Ryan.
Yeah, so what Tom says is absolutely correct. Yeah, the more value you're holding in a player that you're not expecting to start every week, probably the worse for your weekly projection, of course. But it's also worse for your flexibility as a manager. Quarterbacks in Dynasty, in my experience, some of the most illiquid assets that there are. People will generally have their 3 quarterbacks that they're comfortable with and not really want to move off of them unless it's a quarterback for quarterback swap. Just I think kind of because everyone has like this fear of getting caught without a quarterback. So it becomes very difficult to have a quarterback be the only quarterback in a deal, right? Usually they're going to be a quarterback on each side of a deal. So because of that, the more value you have in that QB3, that's less value on your roster that you can trade in week 8 to make a different move to address a different position that you might need to, right? So yeah, I always aim for as low value of a QB3 as possible, but at as high, obviously, of expected production. So yeah, I mean, going into last year, like Matt Stafford and Aaron Rodgers were probably the best examples, just in terms of old guys that we can have a reasonable expectation of putting up fantasy points. That's kind of what I'm looking for most of the time. I guess the exception to this would be if my QB3 just is a value bet that I like. So if you were holding JJ McCarthy throughout this past season as like a value bet, that's fine to me. Obviously, he's not really a QB3 in the traditional sense because you knew you were never starting him in 2024. So yeah, I guess that would be the only caveat. But yeah, aside from that, yeah, as low value, high production as possible.
Yeah, I agree. I don't really value the quarterback 3 anymore because if you draft like a Geno in the 11th or 12th round, like that's fine. I would rather just have a player you can actually play. When you have a third quarterback, especially when it's a high value, you're sitting there and just waiting for someone else to get hurt and then hope they actually want a quarterback, or you hoard a bunch of quarterbacks and then try to trade it to the people that didn't draft the quarterbacks in the startup, but they didn't draft a quarterback in the startup because they don't value a quarterback and they're not going to trade with you. So I don't value I used to do it. Like I used to always pick that 9th round quarterback to try to trade him for a position player that went in the 6th round. That would like almost always work a couple years ago. People are just kind of much smarter now. They'd rather just like send their second for Derek Carr or just not buy like the Genos and the Staffords. Guys don't hold values like they used to back a couple years ago.
Yeah, safety at quarterback isn't a thing. I've said this for a long time. I feel like people are coming around to it. I have been the kick the QB2 down the road in Superflex drafts now for 4 years. Finally kind of getting my credit for it. Shout out TD, always giving me the credit for that. I'll always do that. I won a championship this year with Tyler Huntley. I won a championship this year while having Trevor Lawrence, Kyler Murray, Will Levis, Justin Fields, all-star games for me at some point this year because they were cheap and I drafted them. Well, Trevor Lawrence wasn't cheap. That's a Jacob thing. Obviously, I would never click the Trevor Lawrence button. That's besides the point. Except for if Liam Cohen gets over there, hey, you better believe I'm going to start clicking that button if he stays cheap. But I am much more inclined to go and get Daniel Jones this year. I'm inclined to go and get the scrubs. Again, Carr, once again, he's going to be on like 80% of my rosters again because he's cheap and he plays. Rattler is going to be on teams of mine. I treat quarterbacks like handcuffed running backs. The bottom of my roster, maybe I played DeVito. I played Locke in the game that cost, while he's out there costing the Giants the first overall pick. Yeah. See, we're not just gaslighting Ryan over here, but I'm very much into those types because they provide the most value when they play. So I'm very much less willing to pay up for that. I think you should value a third quarterback. I'm just not valuing them highly. I like your picks of Geno and Stafford. I love those. Those are two phenomenal examples.
Send a third for 2025 Giants starter Will Levis.
Oh God! I mean, I want to buy Levis. I do. I don't mind buying, but yeah, that's so funny. Giants future starter. Oh man, I can do that all day. All right, we had a question from Nate. Stroud scramble rate. He says, thoughts. Could his playoff performance signal a higher rushing floor in 2025? Now, this sparked a little bit of debate in the Discord today. I have been a very much avid anti-CJ Stroud at 103. I'm anti-Stroud at 109 with the wide receivers available. I obviously want Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. and even Amon-Ra still and Nico, and I want wide receivers at that case because he is a bit of a pylon. Now, I don't think the rushing, he was the number one in rushing yards with scrambles for the first two rounds of the playoffs. I think that is simply because he had to or he was going to die. 8 sacks allowed by the Texans against the Chiefs. He was running for his quite literal life. I will point out that his fantasy points per opportunity was 0.37 in the regular season, 0.36 in the playoffs. He did increase his rushing scramble yards by 100 from year 1 to year 2, but we obviously saw the horrendous drop in hyper super efficiency from year 1 to year 2. I think that we need to have a 300 to 350 yard floor for me to consider somebody's rushing floor pretty high. That's just my opinion. That's just how I look at it. He's still going to have to be like a hyper efficient passing quarterback, volume, right? 36 touchdowns, 8 or fewer interceptions, 4,500 yards. If you at that point get the complimentary 300, 350 yards rushing, maybe a score, you got a top 6 quarterback right there. You got a top 5 quarterback for sure. I do not think what we've seen in the playoffs signals a change in his play style, and I also don't see him playing better because of it. So it's just something to note. I don't think it affects the price for me very much, but I will say it was nice to see him just take off a little bit instead of just getting continuously beat up in the pocket. I think that there's an opportunity. My final thought on this is I think there's an opportunity for his rushing floor to increase. I do. I do not think it's quite the difference enough to hop him back from 109 to 103. That makes sense? I think that makes sense. Ryan,
I think I might go like even harder or more punitive than you here though, Thomas. Quarterbacks generally do scramble and run more in the playoffs. That's just something we've seen for years. I wish I had like multiple years of data on hand to back up that claim, but I'm very confident that's true. Maybe that's a to-do list item for me later this week. But quarterbacks, yeah, in the playoffs, when it matters most, when it's win or go home, they're going to take off more. They're not as concerned about protecting themselves. It's just something we've seen for a long time. As for like Stroud's outlook going forward, I do think it's notable that the Texans offensive line obviously struggled a lot throughout this year. they did struggle in a very specific way. And I've been hearing this brought up by like NFL ball knowers since probably week 4 or week 5. I think was when Scott DiBenedetto here at Fantasy Points first brought this to my attention. But the Texans just have no answers for any type of stunts that defenses will throw at them. So really just anything weird that a defense wants to do on the blitz that is not just a straight up like man on man, we got to block these guys. The Texans offensive line just instantly folds. I pulled the data before the show. In this season, in 2024, Stroud was pressured on 57% of dropbacks where the defense utilized a stunt. That is the second highest of any quarterback in the Fantasy Points data era, behind only 2023 Tommy DeVito, but behind that, like ridiculously beat up 2023 Giants offensive line with DeVito holding the ball for over 3 seconds on average. So yeah, that's about as bad as it gets in terms of an offensive line dealing with kind of the trickery that defenses have increasingly been putting offenses up against. I mean, maybe notably, the Texans O-line coach is not returning next season, Chris Strausser. They have announced that he's not returning. I had missed this in the preseason. Apparently, he was already contemplating retirement before the season. So if you really want to try hard, maybe you can spin a narrative that this guy was just totally checked out of his job the entire season. Wasn't even planning to be with the team this year. Maybe that rubbed off culturally on the rest of the offensive line and how prepared they were for each game. So maybe some new offensive line coach comes in and fixes some of CJ Stroud's issues. I personally would lean toward probably not. His situation is just worse. This Texans defense is too good right now is how it looks for him to ever really be back in that kind of high volume role that we have seen we need from pocket quarterbacks to be important in fantasy. And I was also reminded, even in his rookie season, which we raved about as impressive, record-breaking, one of the best rookie seasons ever, Stroud averaged about 13 fantasy points per game without Tank Dell across his entire rookie season. The good season was still not a good fantasy quarterback when Tank Dell was not on the field. And Tank Dell is not going to be on the field for the entirety of 2025. So yeah, I am still fairly pessimistic on Stroud. I'd much rather have the wide receivers Thomas mentioned over him in Dynasty. I'd much rather have Trey McBride over him in Dynasty in a tight end premium league. That's like going to be a pretty easy decision point for me in startups this year. So yeah, that's where I'm at on Stroud and kind of everything around the Texans.
Yeah, it's important to note, and I'm not just ripping on the guy to rip on him. I want to make it it's like perfectly clear. Brock Purdy rushed for 300 yards and 2 touchdowns scrambling. Stroud didn't even hit that. Like, Brock Purdy's not a mobile quarterback. He's not dual threat. Justin Herbert had 311. Mahomes, 333. Bo Nix, 261. Baker, 368 on just scrambles. As we know, they're not doing design runs really with him. Right? He's got to at least hit that while maintaining volume and hyper efficiency. Can it increase his floor? Sure. Absolutely. Do I think it's because of what he did in the playoffs? No. I don't. I think he needs to hit that 350-yard floor, and I don't know if he can get there. I don't. I'm skeptical. Well, it's not that he can't get there. He clearly can. Will he over the course of a full season? I don't think so, and I don't think they want him doing that, if I'm being totally honest. Buck, anything to add before we move on?
I agree with that. That was going to be my point, that the quarterbacks just run more in the playoffs. But I would like to see him do it. I thought he looked legitimately good when he was doing it. I think he could do it. There's a lot of times this year where, and Mita Kimes, a shout out to Mita Kimes, she brought that up on her podcast a few weeks ago about how like she really thinks he needs to just get better at like just committing to the run. There's so many times where he'll like run, think about it, and just throw it out of bounds and have green grass in front of him. So that's one of like I think the biggest things he needs to get better at this offseason. Maybe he makes it a point to really get better at. He's left a lot of yards on the field this year, just like almost scrambling and deciding, no, I don't want to scramble. So I don't know if that's a point that he's going to like actually make to get better as a quarterback, because I do think he could do it. And that's not something we want to bet on, that he'll, spend an off season like watching tape and seeing that he should be running more. But he definitely did in the playoffs, and he looked good doing it. But I don't think I don't think we should think that he's all of a sudden just going to be a 400-yard rusher now.
Right. I agree. I will say, like, pretty interesting. Bryce Young had 6 scrambling touchdowns last year. He led the league. That's kind of crazy.
Shout out Rod Wave. How many were after the Rod Wave conversation?
Probably all of them, Buck. Probably all of them. Known socialite, keeping up with the Kardashians of football, was all over the Rod Wave motivational speech to Bryce Young to turn his season around. No coincidences here. We gotta get you as like our weekly live like Entertainment Tonight reporter. Just talk about whatever social standing information there is. Whose birthday is it this week? You knew T. Higgins off the top of your head. It's truly an incredible skill if you think about it.
Yesterday. Happy birthday, T.
That's what I'm talking about. Oh man. Big Diaz Energy says, I think Stroud is a nesting doll quarterback. Fade him for Dak plus Tua plus Carr plus. Yep. I'm not as deep there, but I'm
not the Carr one.
I'll tell you, not the Carr one. That's too deep even for me. But like Dak and Tua, I can get it. Pluses should be bigger. Not totally there, but there. And we'll end up with this one from at DLoosh13. Hey Ryan, do you think the RB production we saw in 2024 is a trend due to offenses countering the too high and similar coverages, or an outlier due to injury luck / other factors? And how should we attack this in 2025? Now, I know this is the big thing for you. You're going to dive right into it. So maybe we don't open the whole can of worms, but maybe as we end here, we kind of give them a little teaser. This is just some early thoughts in this process with this one.
Yeah, sounds good. So in terms of, I will boil this question down to, is running back fantasy production up in 2024 because of like these league-wide schematic trends, whatever it is that you want to say they are? Lots of intelligent people have made some pretty good arguments, including our own Jacob Sanderson on last week's show. Or is it a fluke? Is this something we should expect to regress next year? What should I do as a fantasy manager with the running back position broadly? And I am going to have a lot more on this in my key takeaways article, and maybe this ends up spinning off into its own article as well, depending how deep I get. But I will say, just kind of to start out, if it were a league-wide schematic thing based on what defenses are doing or what offenses are doing, I would expect to see a shift in terms of overall rushing production or overall running back production league-wide, right? But when you look at the macro numbers over the last 4 or 5 years, just in terms of total rushing attempts by running backs, yards per carry by running backs, fantasy points, and even expected fantasy points by running backs, all of these are pretty much steady since 2021. Expected fantasy points for running backs are actually declining, and that's because their target shares have been declining for years, right? So yeah, at a broad macro level, 2024 didn't look that different for running backs. Obviously, in fantasy, what we care about is the micro level, because it is only the handful of players that are power law players that matter in fantasy and win you fantasy championships every single year. So yeah, I'm not sitting here and saying that like what you saw from Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley this year was fake, because it league wide, nothing changed. Like that obviously is not the important point. The point of this is I'm still skeptical that it's because of a league-wide schematic shift that has just made it easier to run the ball, or whatever version of that argument you'd like to go with. I will say what has been more convincing to me, just from kind of preliminarily digging in, is just the injury stuff, right? This felt very apparent during the season, I will say, as someone that drafted a lot of Rashee Rice and Chris Godwin, especially. We ran really bad with wide receiver injuries, and we ran really well with running back injuries. I threw the numbers together earlier today. So in terms of running backs that were drafted as top 30 running backs by ADP in the preseason, the highest percentage of those top 30 ever, or sorry, not ever, in the last 10 years played at least 15 games and stayed healthy, right? So 63% of those top 30 running backs played at least 15 games this year. That actually ties 2022 for the highest of any season over the past 10 years. And even more dramatically with wide receivers, only 50% of top 30 receivers by ADP actually played 15 games this year. And that is by far the lowest since 2015. So putting kind of these together, my initial lean is I really think a lot of what we saw is just down to very micro, very individual injury luck, that a lot of the wide receivers that were set up to be very productive this year ended up getting hurt. And a lot of the running backs that were set up to be very productive this year ended up not getting hurt and ended up playing the entire season. In terms of like things that are swirling around in my mind that I want to dig deeper into, the goal line efficiency is a pretty interesting conversation to me. From what I've seen so far, goal line conversion rates, so rush attempts inside the 5-yard line, have been converting at a similar rate pretty constantly over the last 4 or 5 years. The rush attempts at the goal line overall have gone up a bit. Teams are doing it a bit more, only about like 10 or 11% more over the past 4 or 5 years. So nothing hugely significant there. But I will say I'm very curious. I'm going to keep digging for these more league-wide schematic trends if there's anything that we can latch onto here. But yeah, I will say right now the clearest evidence to me suggests that this was most likely just an injury fluke thing. But yeah, stay tuned for a ton more analysis on that. Bringing in VORP and Fantasy War and all the good stuff in my key takeaways article that it is in progress right now and will be up relatively soon, I'm sure.
I think it's a pretty thorough breakdown. Andy, anything to add? There's one thing I want to add, but I'll save it for the end. Just a little fun little quiz here.
No, honestly, I don't. I think he broke it down really good. I think at one point, I don't remember off the top of my head, but we had like 2 20-point scores, like 20-point per game scores, which was like the lowest of all time or whatever from the wide receiver. Yeah, because we lost Rashee, we lost Godwin. Even with those, that's still only 4. It was just a really bad year for wide receiver production. Also, which actually it wasn't a bad year for 0 RB, believe it or not. It sounds like it would be, but there were still the Chase Browns, the Bucky Irving, so it was a really good year for 0 RB.
Hey, Chuba Hubbard, got to give you your credit.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, my guy Chuba. So it was a good year. You did. It was actually Chuba versus Chase Brown. That was the 2 best 0 RB
both
picks
won, baby. We both won.
We both won that one, so that was a good one. But so we'll see a massive shift with the running backs being drafted early, which please, I want you to do that so I could, get my wide receivers and I could draft like a guy like Trey Benson, who was an awful pick this year. Just injury just didn't happen. He was always going to be a bad pick if the injury didn't happen. So a lot of those guys that maybe get pushed back this year because it didn't happen this past year, I think we should definitely be in on, because realistically, it's just probably not going to hold up. I mean, we've seen it over the last 10 years, like Ryan said. So yeah, I agree with most of that. But what you got?
Okay. So we're talking about running backs and that they're going to increase because of the production. Let me ask you some questions, because this blows my mind a little bit. While you guys were talking, I went through to Dynasty Data Lab, our trusty website, and I did some digging. This last year, one of the most epic running back seasons of all time. Well, maybe not of all time, but in recent memory, really. Through the first 5 rounds, from January 1st to January 21st, how many running backs do you think are being selected? We'll go including Genty. How many running backs are being selected to the first 5 rounds this year? Top of your
12.
head. Good guess.
I have it up in front of me, so I feel like I'm cheating.
Did you count it though?
I didn't
So
count it. I
close
just
it?
glanced at it. Okay. I have like a number in my head from glancing at it. It's
What's
like
the number?
11.
13 if you include Genty. 12 if you don't. Last year, in 2024, how many running backs were drafted to the first 5 rounds? Now, keep in mind, this is between May and August. I always do it after the NFL draft to the end of August when drafts are really going down.
Last year, I'm gonna guess 7.
Okay, through the first 5 rounds, Buck?
I guess 10.
13.
Oh wow. Okay. I remember startups very differently, I guess.
Me too, because I was trying to think of like Kenneth Walker in the 7th round and Josh
Rashad
Jacobs.
White, Josh Jacobs,
Oh.
Pacheco, Walker, Achan, Kyron,
Hashtag
Taylor.
not in my leagues.
Etienne, Barkley, Bijan, McCaffrey, Hall, and Gibbs were all being drafted in the first 5.
Even Barkley in the startups I was in was past the 6th round. He was past the 6th.
Yeah. That's why we don't do the hashtag not in my league in this. That's why we make it a joke. But what's really interesting, if you go back to May 1st, 2022, and August 31st, 2022, how many running backs do you think were drafted in the first 5 rounds?
2022, so we skipped 2023.
Just so I could get some information. I want to do this for every year. But it just adds some contrast.
What was even happening in 2022?
It's hard to think about, right?
I'll guess 15.
Not a bad guess. Buck?
I can't really remember who was even good in 2022. I'll say 17.
No.
It was 17. 17 running backs. So the idea that running back value is going to be propped up just based off of the production from this year so far is just factually not accurate. I think fantasy managers have just become too aware and too smart, if you would, if I want to give them the credit for the average player. They've become smart to the value of running backs. A lot of players are still going to pass on the mid-age running back breakouts or the 29-year-olds and still try to find the Chuba Hubbard going in the 8th round, or go and find the Chase Brown still, or the next Bucky Irving. They don't want to pay for these guys. For example, guys like Jonathan Taylor was going at the 1-5 in Superflex. Najee at the 111. Javonte, McCaffrey, Swift was up there. Eckler was in the 2nd round. Mixon in the 3rd. Dalvin Cook in the 3rd round. Derrick Henry in the 4th. Nick Chubb in the 4th. Etienne in the 4th. Right? Akers in the 5th. And then even in the 6th round, early 6th, the first 3 picks of the 6th round were Aaron Jones, Antonio Gibson, and David Montgomery. I mean, Elijah Mitchell was going in the 7th round. Running backs like him just aren't going there anymore. So the idea that running backs are just magically going to gain value now because of the production does not necessarily guarantee to carry over from year after year, because players are evolving. Fantasy players are evolving. Now, maybe the draft changes because the 2025 one was for rookie picks being involved. Maybe post-draft, maybe these rookies get propped up and then we end up with, 15? Maybe? 14? Does it go up a few? Maybe? A couple extra ones get in there? But we included Genty. So don't look at the running back production now as like a lock for a trend. That would be the simplest way for me to put it without a bunch of data from Ryan. If I'm just looking at the board, it doesn't hurt to go back and look at previous boards and see what was happening a couple years ago to understand where we are at as a fantasy base. Wide receivers are always going to be highly coveted. Quarterbacks are generally always overdrafted by elite tight ends, and these running back trends, it's gone down. So keep that in mind. I thought that was a nice little tidbit to add there at the end to really look at my thoughts for this running back value increase. I just think it's fake. That's all. I just think the low tier to mid tier running backs are going to move up. That running back in the 8th round, he's going to be in the 6th round now. The running back in the 10th round, you're probably going to have to reach for him at, 8th 8.5. That's the differences. Anything to add before we get out of here?
Yeah, I mean, not really. I fully agree that I'm not entirely convinced that the market is just going to follow last year's results. We have seen that historically in fantasy football. That was certainly the case around when I started playing, even in redraft in like 2015, 2016. I remember that was very exploitable. Like just draft running backs the year after all the running backs got hurt in 2015 into 16 was very profitable. But yeah, I agree. It's not. Yeah, I think the average fantasy manager, and certainly the ones we play in leagues with, are smart enough to understand this stuff. So yeah, not saying that any of the analysis I just gave is like groundbreaking and is going to give you this huge edge against the market. But it's interesting to me. So I want to break it down as best I can for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Buck, final thoughts before we sign off?
No, that's it. I think sometimes I do have redraft brain, especially when we talk about running backs. So that gets stuck in my head thinking about just like my mouth starts watering when I think about people drafting a bunch of first round running backs in redraft, because that is one of my favorite things. That's where I get to play my Sincere McCormicks and all my Michael Carters. I got to play him this year. That was cool. So I think I think that's it. I think you guys said it best, and we'll see. We'll see what, like you said, we'll see with the draft class. Maybe two more after Genty. Now that we lost both Penn State guys, but we'll see. I mean, even the 6th round, I know after pre-draft, after the NFL draft, I know Brooks and Benson both got like around that range, 6th, 7th round. So, and we expected that. I mean, even though it was right, we expected that running back class to be awful, and we still got 2 guys who had legitimate value for at least a minute. So it could happen. Even a guy like Marshawn Lloyd gained legitimate value. He was like a 10th round pick. So
I just wanted him to play, man. I just wanted him to play. That's going to do it for the show tonight. Hope you enjoyed. We're going to do a lot more of these kind of AMA casual conversations. It's a little bit of a tricky time for off season, but don't worry. You're still going to get your players to buy, players to sell, things that piss us off over there on the Dynasty Points Market Report. You'll get that first thing Saturday morning, or you can get that Friday morning on the Dynasty Points feed. Love all you guys for tuning in with us. If you ask us a question, we love and appreciate you. If you hit like and subscribe, I love and appreciate you. This show is phenomenal. Buck, happy to have you make your debut. You made it, an hour and 42. I had this scripted for 45 minutes, but like always, it went over an hour and a half because that's how we do things. But this really felt like an easy hour and a half. I didn't feel like this was a strenuous hour and a half. Pretty good little bit of information there for dynasty managers, and you got to see me cope a little bit. So shout out to you guys. If you like the video, hit subscribe, leave a comment, leave us a review wherever you're listening. It goes a long way. Remember that fantasy football is supposed to be fun. The playoffs are supposed to be fun. So even though your team might have lost and it might have been painful for now, keep in mind that there are phenomenal games this weekend. We only have 2 weekends of real football to be played total left. And by the time that is over, we are going to be starving for the Hall of Fame game. So just keep that in mind. It's a long ass off season. Enjoy the games that we have left. Check in on your loved ones, even if you're not sure that they need it. And remember that clear eyes and full hearts can never lose, and that your best days, they're always spent tilting with us over at Fantasy Points. Good night, everybody.
What? Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.